is about thinking of your flaws, thinking of comments that were given to you, thinking of pitfalls that you may personally experience as a professional, and creating a checklist to prevent those things from happening in projects that you join, in projects that you build, in things that help you to move forward. And it's also about thinking in terms of being a boss, being your own boss, thinking of ways that you can improve. So you take upon the perspective of not just the instructional designer, but the perspective as well of the boss, someone who you're working for, your supervisor, or your boss being, let's say, your client, and you're working independently as, say, a contractor, or a coworker, and you're helping them on a project. So it's really about regulating yourself and regulating your approach and correcting any mistakes that you have been known to make in the past before you make them. A lot of this presentation is inspired by the book How to Think Like a Boss, which was created by Barry Egan. I think it's out of print, but you can't. It's still available digitally from websites like Books on Board. It's a very interesting read, and this book in many ways inspired me to write these materials, and I did get permission from the author to talk about this a little bit. This book was recommended to me by a boss who was helping me to develop skills to move forward and skills to recognize and mitigate my flaws and focus on my strengths. And that's what a lot of the themes that you'll be hearing in this presentation over and over again will be about. So a couple things to remember is perception. You always want to make sure that the people that you work with, whether they're peers or they're others, that they look good, and you are perceiving them well, and they are perceived well because of your work. And when you think about who your clients are, even if let's say they're students or there's someone you're developing an instructional design project for, how are you meeting their needs? How are you making them look good? And many times when instructional designers create modules and learning tools, they only look at what they're building right now in the very closed-minded, closed-world environment, when if they looked at the bigger picture of how their module fits in with the greater scheme, with the greater schema, where things are going, and how it works best, then oftentimes what they create and produce will have more punch and will be more applicable. What's the small picture? The immediacy. What are you doing right now? What are you working on in the immediate future? And also, what's the big picture? Not just your own goals being, I want to go, I want to have meaning, I want to give satisfaction, I want to do a good job, but the bigger picture being, where's my boss going? What's the company's future? How are things progressing along? How does what I do fit into the grand scheme of things? And in thinking of those terms in both ways, it's kind of like you can ride the train from town to town, or you can think about the tracks going across the country. And sometimes as a designer, it's good to think of both things, both metaphors being the big picture and the small picture. Now, when I was creating a list, I wanted to create a list of action items. So I asked the boss and get some bad advice on how to improve myself by saying, because the advice I was given was not actionable. It was just advice that was kind of more metaphysical or just theoretical, and sometimes that's not really helpful. So I got advice such as, meditate and find inner balance and work on small goals. But this advice really didn't help in many ways, because when you have things that you need to improve upon, it's really important to turn advice and suggestions into action items when creating a punctilious checklist. So first you'll collect feedback from others. And from collecting feedback from others, like let's say people say, you don't really listen, or you're too high energy, or you never take a break in what you're saying. Well, when I think about that, I think, hey, maybe instead of trying to read an audience, I also need to learn about them through everything that they say. Or to put it a nice way, to keep my mouth shut and just listen and learn from listening, or learn from reading, and check my energy levels and check the audience's energy levels. Sometimes, and this may sound a little crazy to you, but when we get really excited or passionate about a project, we forget to breathe. We forget to inhale. And let's all just take a moment and breathe. Okay, now I have a little bit of oxygen. I've given maybe a moment for the listener to ask questions, and maybe I've given myself a moment to collect my thoughts. So in listening to feedback, I turn that feedback into measurable items. And these are some of the measurable items that I came up with, and I look at this very often to try to think of ways to approach things in a professional manner. It's important when going through your educational journey to make a collection of all the good comments you've gotten. Now, for you in the program, you're kind of halfway there, so it's good to think about the comments that were given to you by professors and peers up until now, and then use a checklist to move forward. It's also good when composing a checklist to think outside. Think about family members who might have given you advice, or co-workers, or peers, or people you respect, or bosses in your current job. Incorporate these things because they may be really valid points of contention with people around you, or points of improvement for yourself. So think about what these people say and put them into an actionable item list. Another important thing to think about when you're creating your punctilious checklist is to think about love, honesty, family, respect. What are these things? Well, these are your values. And oftentimes when creating a checklist to mitigate your flaws and focus on your strengths, values play a huge role. For example, if you're thinking about taking upon a project and it's not, you don't need the money, let's say, or you have a few choices to work from, if you think about what's important to you, let's say time, let's say family, and someone comes to you approach and say, hey, you're going to have to work 60 hours a week or 80 hours a week. Well, that, even though the money might be good, the values of that job may conflict with yours. So it's something to think about, because if you don't understand what your personal values are, then you run a big risk of alienating yourself from the process and alienating others. So it's important to think about these things when creating a checklist to work on what we call the punctilious nature of work or professionalism. It's also to think about values that push you away, and it's not so much that you'll encounter all these types of people, but if you know that you're very sensitive, let's say, to selfishness, well, if you come upon a client or a coworker or a boss that has these qualities that push you away, it's important to recognize it so that you know what your red buttons are and when they're being hit. And, as much as we've all worked on it, there's still going to be situations where these things occur. And the punctilious checklist is a tool to help you realize that you're entering these situations, so you'll know to either keep your guard up or to respond differently or to think about these things. The other reason it's important to think about what I call pushing and pulling values is because many times it creates a lot of conflict in people's lives, in the sense that if others don't know what your values are, it's really hard to get along with people in general if they don't know what to expect, what you expect from them, and they don't know what to expect from you, or they don't know how to provide that to you. For example, do you ever meet somebody who hates when people show them disrespect, and then they say, well, they hate to teach people what respect is, that everybody should automatically know? It should automatically be universal knowledge for everybody to know what my definition of respect is, and anytime anybody breaks it, I'm going to be really mad. Well, aren't I setting myself up for failure, and aren't I setting others to fail in my eyes if they don't know what is important to me? And if I don't know what is, and aren't I going to fail if I don't know what's important to them? So these are things to think about in addition to values when creating your punctilious checklist. Remember, you are always ultimately your own boss, and ultimately you make the decisions in your life. Thank God we live in a free country, and we can make choices, and hopefully you'll be able to make these choices, and you'll be able to create a checklist that will help you adjust and will help you mitigate through a lot of challenges that you'll face in your career and even in this program. So I hope that this time you spent watching this video is helpful. I hope you enjoy writing your punctilious checklist, and I hope that it helps you in the future in future conversations, maybe job interviews. It helps you as a checklist to check the work that you're going to work on and to check the work that you've already done. I mean, even if it's minor action items of things that you've been repeating yourself as far as mistakes or pitfalls you've fallen into, I hope it saves you in the future from situations that could possibly become missed opportunities. And that's really the goal of graduate school in many ways, is to think differently, change your paradigms, and build upon your strengths and mitigate your weaknesses. So with that, I wish you luck, excelsior, ever upward, and lots of success in the months to come and in the future in general. So thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope it was helpful.